The night air over the small town of Ravenshollow had a strange weight to it, the kind that made people close their windows earlier than usual and glance over their shoulders without knowing why. Locals say the wind carries whispers from the past, fragments of a story too disturbing to be spoken aloud, a story the town has tried to bury for more than a century. But history has a way of clawing its way back to the surface, especially when it belongs to the Ravencroft family. The Ravencrofts were once the crown jewel of Ravenshollow, wealthy, cultured, and impossibly charming. Their sprawling estate sat high on a cliffside, its windows catching the last light of the setting sun like molten gold. At the center of it all was Lord Nathaniel Ravencroft, a man whose presence could fill a room before he even entered it. Tall, impeccably dressed, with eyes that seemed to read your secrets before you spoke them. He carried himself like someone born to command. By his side was his young wife, Elara, whose beauty was the kind that made people stare a moment too long. But it wasn't just her looks. There was something magnetic about her, as if the air itself shifted when she walked into the room. From the outside, they were the picture of perfection. But the townsfolk, careful as they were not to speak ill of their benefactors, couldn't ignore the strange pattern that had followed the Ravencroft line for generations. Whispers of sudden tragedies, unexplained disappearances, and a romance so intense it bordered on dangerous obsession. Even in their most public moments, Nathaniel and Elara seemed bound by something deeper than love, something almost supernatural. Some said it was fate. Others said it was a curse. You see, the Ravencrofts' love story wasn't just about stolen glances and moonlit dances. It was a love that consumed, a love that left no space for anything or anyone else. And in a place like Ravenshollow, where secrets thrive in the dark, such love was both mesmerizing and terrifying to witness. I first heard about them from an elderly librarian named Mrs. Halford, who had lived her whole life in town. She spoke in a low voice, as though the walls themselves might be listening. She told me about the night in 1894 when a grand masquerade ball was held at the Ravencroft estate. The invitations were handwritten in gold ink, promising an evening of music, wine, and romance under the winter moon. It was said that Nathaniel and Elara danced together for hours, barely speaking, as though the rest of the world had melted away. Yet as the clock neared midnight, the laughter in the grand hall began to fade. Guests noticed Nathaniel's sudden absence, followed by Elara's pale face as she slipped quietly from the room. No one saw them again that night. By morning, the estate was silent. The front doors stood ajar, a faint trail of footprints leading down the cliffside path to where the waves crashed violently against the rocks. Some claimed they saw a figure, dressed in black, walking along the shore at dawn. Others swore they heard Elara's voice calling out in the wind, her tone desperate and pleading. But the truth was, no one could say for certain what happened after that ball. And the more I listened, the more I realized that the Ravencroft history was not one story, but many, each more tangled and shadowed than the last. The strangest part? Even now, people report seeing candlelight flickering in the windows of the abandoned mansion on stormy nights. Sometimes, faint music drifts down the hill, as if a ball is still in progress, frozen in time. And there are those, brave or foolish enough, who claim to have heard soft laughter echoing in the empty halls, always followed by the faint scent of roses. I can't help but wonder, was the Ravencroft romance truly a tragic love story? Or was it something far darker in disguise? Were Nathaniel and Elara victims of a family curse, or did they choose their fate? And if their love was as powerful as the legends suggest, could it still be alive in some form today? Before we go further, I want you to think about something. Do you believe that love can be so strong it defies time, even death? Or do you think some love stories are simply too dangerous to survive? Let me know in the comments. In fact, I've set up a poll. Do you think the Ravencrofts' love was cursed? Or was it their own choices that sealed their fate? As we uncover the truth together, piece by chilling piece, I promise you this. The deeper we go, the more you'll realize that the Ravencroft family's history isn't just a ghost story. It's a mirror, reflecting the extremes of human passion, ambition, and desire. And perhaps, it's a warning. The answers, if they exist, are hidden in the shadows of that cliffside mansion. And tonight we'll take our first step into those shadows. But be warned, once we enter the Ravencroft estate, there may be no turning back. The question is, are you ready? Because the doors are opening now, and someone or something is waiting inside. The mansion's grand doors creaked open, the sound echoing into the cold night like an unspoken warning. The air inside was heavy, thick with the faint smell of old wood and something sweet, faintly floral, like a memory of roses left too long in the dark. The floor beneath my feet groaned with each cautious step, as if the house itself was aware of my presence. In the dim glow of my lantern, I could just make out the sweeping staircase, its railing carved with intricate patterns of ivy and ravens, the same motifs that appeared in almost every story about the Ravencroft family. I had come here searching for answers, but what struck me first was how alive the place felt. Dust hung in the air like mist, but the furniture stood in perfect order. Chairs aligned, the grand piano polished as if someone had recently touched it. I could almost imagine Elara sitting there, her fingers gliding across the keys, her eyes lifting briefly toward the balcony where Nathaniel would stand watching her. Even now, I could feel the ghost of their connection lingering in the air, an unspoken electricity, like the tension before a storm. Locals had told me the Ravencrofts were not like other couples of their time. They were not content to simply host dinners and keep to polite conversation. Their marriage, from what people saw, was almost theatrical. They could be found walking through the town square on rainy afternoons, holding hands and speaking in hushed voices, as though they shared a secret too dangerous for anyone else to hear. There were rumors that Nathaniel never looked at another woman, and Elara never seemed interested in anyone else's company. Their love was intense, almost isolating, and perhaps that was why it became the center of so much speculation. One story, told by a former housemaid, described a night when Elara had fallen ill. Nathaniel was said to have stayed by her side for days, refusing to eat or sleep, speaking softly to her even when she was unconscious. She recovered, but the maid swore she overheard Nathaniel whisper, "I would rather follow you into the dark than live in a world without you." That single sentence lingered with me, chilling in its devotion. Was it a vow of love or a dangerous promise? As I moved through the long hallway, my lantern light brushed against faded portraits. Each Ravencroft was captured in striking detail, their expressions proud but never warm. Nathaniel's portrait stood out the most, his eyes painted so vividly that they seemed to follow me. Elara's, however, was different. She was turned slightly away from the viewer, her gaze aimed at something beyond the frame, as if she were distracted by a distant thought, or perhaps by something only she could see. Down the hall, I found a door left slightly ajar. Inside was what looked like a private study. Dust lay over the desk, but the items on it were untouched. A quill, a glass of ink, and a stack of letters bound by a faded ribbon. My pulse quickened. The letters were addressed in the same delicate handwriting. My dearest Elara. The ink was dark, the words deeply pressed into the paper, as if written with a kind of urgency. I didn't dare read them just yet. What struck me was how the entire mansion seemed frozen in the middle of a moment. It was as if Nathaniel and Elara had simply stepped out for a walk and never returned. The mystery wasn't just about their disappearance. It was about why the house refused to let go of them. Some in town believed their love had been so strong it imprinted on the very walls, binding them here in spirit. Others believed something far more sinister had tied them to this place. Standing there, I began to feel the strange pull everyone in Raven's Hollow warned me about, the way the Ravencroft story draws you in until you're not just hearing it, you're living it. I imagined what it must have been like in the days before that fateful ball. Perhaps Nathaniel had been preparing something for Elara, some grand gesture, a promise of forever. Perhaps she had been planning something too. But were they planning together or against one another? The townsfolk never agreed on the nature of their last days. Some said Nathaniel was deeply protective, almost possessive of Elara. Others whispered that she had secrets of her own, that she sometimes left the estate under the cover of night. Was she meeting someone, or was she searching for a way to break free from whatever had bound her to Nathaniel? No one could say for sure, I traced my fingers along the edge of the desk, the wood cool and smooth beneath my hand. The more I explored, the more I felt as if I were trespassing not just on private property, but on the remains of something intensely personal. A love that burned so brightly it left scorch marks on time itself. From somewhere deeper in the house, a faint sound reached me. It was soft, almost indistinguishable from the sigh of the wind, but it was there. A melody, played slowly and deliberately. My skin prickled. It was the same tune Mrs. Halford had hummed when she told me about the Ravencroft ball. The waltz Elara loved. I froze, listening, my heart pounding in the silence between notes. The music grew fainter, as though it were retreating further into the house, urging me to follow. Against my better judgment, I did. Room by room, I moved toward the sound. The corridors seemed to stretch longer the deeper I went, the walls narrowing as though the house wanted to keep me here. I passed through a sitting room, the air warmer there, and then a narrow passage lined with candle holders. A single candle burned at the end, its flame steady despite the draft. When I finally reached the source of the music, I stopped short. The grand ballroom lay before me, its chandeliers dark but its floor gleaming in the lantern light. In the center of the room stood the piano, its lid open. No one sat at the keys, yet the melody continued, soft, haunting, and unmistakably alive. For a moment, I thought I saw movement on the far balcony, a flicker of a figure in a dark coat watching. My chest tightened. Was it my mind filling in shadows? Or had Nathaniel Ravencroft just looked straight at me? I don't know how long I stood there, but the moment I took a step forward, the music stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound I'd heard that night. Somewhere above me, floorboards creaked. The story of Nathaniel and Elara wasn't just buried in the past. It was still unfolding, and now I was a part of it. I stood in the center of the ballroom, my eyes fixed on the balcony where I thought I had seen that flicker of movement. The air felt different here, thicker, as though the room itself was holding its breath. My lantern's light barely reached the edges, leaving the corners steeped in shadow. Every instinct told me to leave, yet the weight of the Ravencroft story pressed on me, urging me to stay, to dig deeper. The creak of floorboards above made me tilt my head upward. Was it just the settling of the old house, or was someone or something walking there? My pulse quickened as I imagined Nathaniel pacing the upper floor, watching me as an intruder in his private world. And then there was Elara. If she was here too, in some form, what would she want me to know? Or hide? I moved slowly toward the staircase at the far side of the ballroom, my steps echoing. The moment I set foot on the first stair, I felt a strange shift, as if the house approved of my decision to go higher. The scent of roses grew stronger, mingling with the faint trace of sea salt drifting in through some unseen crack in the walls. It was the same scent Mrs. Halford had mentioned when describing Elara's presence. Halfway up, I noticed something odd, 2 sets of footprints in the dust. One was heavy and deliberate, the other lighter, almost hesitant. They trailed upward side by side, only to vanish halfway down the corridor. It made me wonder, had Nathaniel and Elara walked together up here on their last night, or had one been chasing the other? The first door I opened led into a lavish bedroom, untouched by time. The drapes were drawn, yet a soft light filtered in, pale and silvery. A vanity sat against the far wall, its mirror slightly fogged as if someone had just breathed upon it. I moved closer, and for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement in the glass. A flicker of a woman's face, her eyes filled with something between love and fear. But when I blinked, it was gone. On the vanity lay a small box. Inside was a necklace, a thin gold chain with a pendant shaped like a raven's wing. Its surface was warm, as though it had been held recently. I turned it over and found a tiny inscription. Always. Was this Nathaniel's gift to her, or hers to him? And why had it been left out, as if waiting to be found? The main conflict in their story seemed to weave itself tighter the more I uncovered. Nathaniel's devotion to Elara was legendary, but devotion can turn dangerous when it leaves no room to breathe. Town gossip hinted that he had begun isolating her from friends and family, keeping her world small and entirely his. Yet there were also whispers that Elara had secrets of her own, that she'd been seen speaking quietly to a man in the marketplace, a stranger no one recognized. Imagine being trapped between love and longing for freedom. Was Elara torn between staying with the man she once adored and escaping the cage their romance had become? Or had Nathaniel misunderstood her entirely, seeing betrayal where there was none? I stepped away from the vanity, my mind spinning with possibilities. That's when I noticed a faint humming coming from the adjoining room. It was low and soft, the kind of tune one might hum while lost in thought. I moved closer and found a door leading into a smaller sitting area. The sound stopped as soon as I entered. The room was lined with shelves filled with books, some about music, others about rare flowers. On a small table by the window lay a sheet of handwritten music, the same waltz I had heard earlier. At the bottom of the page was a note in delicate handwriting. For you until the end. The tension between Nathaniel and Elara wasn't simply about love. It was about control, about the fragile line between devotion and possession. And I could feel that line tightening the deeper I went into their world. Outside the window, the cliffside stretched down to the restless sea. Waves crashed against the rocks, sending up bursts of white foam. I wondered if, on that last night, they had come to this very spot, their voices raised against the roar of the water. What had been said? Was it a vow, a confession, or a threat? I knew I needed to keep searching. There were too many unanswered questions. Did Elara truly want to leave? Or was she as bound to Nathaniel as he was to her? And what about the stranger she may have met? Was he real? Or just a story invented by jealous tongues in a small town? I want you to think about this for a moment. If you were Elara, caught in a love so deep it became dangerous, what would you do? Would you stay, believing in the man you loved? Or would you run, risking everything for the hope of freedom? Tell me in the comments, and let's see where your instincts lead you. The more I explored, the more the house seemed to play tricks on me. Shadows moved in my peripheral vision, and once, I swore I felt a warm breath against my ear, though no one was there. The scent of roses followed me from room to room, clinging to my thoughts. In one of the smaller rooms I found a trunk, its lock broken. Inside were dresses, neatly folded but faded with time. Beneath them, wrapped in silk, was a journal. The first page was written in Elara's hand, her words looping and graceful. She spoke of her love for Nathaniel, how he made her feel seen in a way no one else had. But as the pages went on, the tone shifted. Her words grew shorter, her sentences sharper. She began mentioning the restlessness in his eyes, the way he listened at doors, the way he asked questions that felt more like accusations. I didn't dare read further yet. My pulse was too loud in my ears, and I knew I needed to keep my wits about me. If this house held their story, it also held the weight of their choices, and perhaps their final moments together. From somewhere deep within the mansion, the piano began again, this time louder, more urgent. It was as though someone wanted to draw me closer, to guide me toward the heart of the truth. But whether that truth would reveal love, betrayal, or something far darker, I wasn't ready to say. All I knew was that the Ravencroft story was no longer just theirs. It was pulling me in, thread by thread, until I wasn't sure if I was investigating a mystery or stepping into a trap of my own. The music drew me deeper into the mansion, each note hitting like a pulse in the air. My footsteps seemed louder than before, echoing in the long corridors, and with every step I felt as though the house itself was closing in around me. The lantern's flame flickered, casting restless shadows along the walls, and I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following. The melody was no longer soft and romantic. It had shifted into something more urgent, as if it were a message being played again and again until someone understood. I followed it to the far end of the upper floor, where a pair of double doors stood slightly open. The space beyond was shrouded in darkness, but the sound poured through like water from a crack in a dam. When I pushed the doors open, I found myself in a room I hadn't seen before. It was smaller than the ballroom but more intimate, walls lined with tall windows, their glass rattling in the wind. In the center was the piano, its keys moving on their own, the the music relentless. My breath caught when I saw a faint outline on the bench, a figure just barely visible, like a shadow made of light. It leaned forward as though pouring every ounce of feeling into the song. The scent of roses hit me hard, almost dizzying now. And then, through the blur of candlelight and shadow, I thought I saw her. Elara. Her face was pale but alive with some untold emotion, her hands ghosting over the piano keys. She didn't look at me. Her gaze was fixed somewhere behind me, on a point in the darkness I couldn't see. A shiver ran down my spine. Was Nathaniel here too, watching us both? I turned slightly, my lantern lifting toward the farthest corner of the room. That's when I noticed a tall mirror against the wall. The glass was old, warped, but it reflected the room clearly enough. Except it showed more than what was in front of me. In the reflection, Nathaniel stood just behind Elara, his hand resting possessively on her shoulder. His eyes in the mirror were not warm. They were sharp, searching, as though he could see straight into my thoughts. I blinked, and the space behind me was empty again. But the air had changed. It was heavier now, pressing on my chest, making every breath an effort. The music stopped suddenly, and the silence crashed over me like a wave. Somewhere deep in the house, a door slammed. The sound was followed by footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer. The echo of each step matched the pounding of my heart. I didn't move. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something else, curiosity maybe or a pull I couldn't name, kept me rooted to the spot. The footsteps grew louder, turning into the hallway outside the room. I could feel the presence before I saw it, a weight in the air that told me whoever or whatever was approaching had been waiting for this moment. The doorknob began to turn. The doorknob turned slowly, the faint metallic click echoing like a countdown. My grip tightened around the lantern, the flame trembling in sync with my own unsteady breath. When the door finally creaked open, I expected to see a shadowy figure or perhaps Nathaniel himself standing there. But instead, it was the empty hallway beyond, still, silent, almost too calm. For a moment I thought my mind was playing tricks on me, the tension in the house winding so tight that every sound became a threat. But then I noticed something strange. A faint trail of rose petals scattered across the wooden floor, leading away from the door and deeper into the corridor. They weren't dry or faded. They looked fresh, their scent so strong it seemed impossible they had been here for over a century. I stepped out of the room, following the trail. My shoes crunched lightly against the petals, and with each step I felt an odd pull forward, as if someone wanted me to see something or someone. The corridor narrowed, and I realized it led toward the part of the house that overlooked the cliff. A cold draft slipped through the cracks in the walls, carrying the distant roar of the sea. The trail ended at a single closed door. Unlike the others in the house, this one was painted a deep, almost black shade of green. The paint cracked in places like it had been locked away from light for years. My hand hovered over the handle, and for a brief second, I hesitated. But curiosity overpowered caution, and I pushed it open. Inside was a small conservatory. Glass walls and ceiling now dulled with age, vines creeping in through shattered panes. The moonlight poured in through the broken glass, silvering the room in a way that made it feel dreamlike, unreal. At the center stood a wrought iron table, and on it, resting perfectly in place, was an envelope sealed with dark red wax in the shape of a raven. I reached for it, and that's when the second twist of the night struck me. The faintest sound of someone whispering my name. Not just any voice. It was soft, melodic, and painfully intimate, as though the speaker stood right beside my ear. My skin prickled, and when I spun around, the room was empty. The whisper came again, but this time I could make out the words, "Don't trust him." My pulse raced. Who was him? Nathaniel? Or someone else entirely? And why did the warning feel less like a plea and more like a desperate attempt to change the course of what was about to happen? I broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. The handwriting was Elara's. I'd seen it in her journal upstairs. It began simply enough, speaking of her love for Nathaniel, of their first meeting, of the way his presence seemed to fill every empty corner of her life. But as I read on, the tone shifted. She wrote about a stranger who had come to Raven's Hollow, someone who seemed to understand her in a way Nathaniel never could. She never named him, only calling him the one who listens. The letter ended abruptly, mid-sentence, as if she had been interrupted. And at the very bottom of the page was a smudge of ink shaped almost like a fingerprint. I stood there, the letter trembling in my hand, when I caught sight of something outside through the cracked glass of the conservatory. Movement down on the rocky shore below. At first I thought it was just the waves breaking against the cliff, but then I saw them. Two figures standing side by side, one taller, one slender, their silhouettes sharp against the moonlit foam. Even from this distance, the sight sent a shiver through me. I knew the legends said Nathaniel and Elara disappeared together, but what if that wasn't true? What if the night of the masquerade didn't end with them walking hand in hand into the sea, but with Elara choosing someone else? Someone the town had erased from the story entirely? A sudden sound snapped my attention back to the room. A low creak, followed by the faint rustle of fabric. I turned to find Nathaniel's portrait leaning against the far wall, the same piercing eyes fixed on me. Only, they weren't quite the same. His expression now seemed darker, more aware, like he recognized me. And then the whisper returned, louder this time, overlapping itself. Two voices now. One pleading, one commanding. The first voice begged me to leave before it was too late. The second told me to stay, promising I was closer to the truth than anyone had ever been. The conflict inside the house was no longer just between Nathaniel and Elara. It felt like a battle that was still raging, pulling me into its center. Love, jealousy, betrayal, and something older, deeper that bound them here. I could feel the weight of a choice pressing down on me. Do I follow the trail of the stranger, this one who listens, and risk tearing apart whatever bond Nathaniel still clung to? Or do I let the Ravencroft story remain as it has been told for over a century, leaving their secrets buried in the walls? But before I could decide, the conservatory door slammed shut behind me. The wind outside picked up, rattling the glass, and for the first time since I stepped into the mansion, I felt the ground beneath me tremble, as if the house itself was waking up. Somewhere beyond the vines and shattered windows, the two figures on the shore began to move. And I knew, without understanding how, that they were coming toward the house. The tremor in the floor deepened, a low rumble that seemed to come from the very bones of the house. My lantern swayed in my grip, its flame darting wildly as though it too sensed something was about to break. Outside, the two figures on the shore moved with purpose, their shapes cutting through the mist like shadows that knew exactly where they belonged. The conservatory's glass rattled under the growing wind, vines swaying as if trying to claw their way inside. I could feel the air change, denser, colder, and in the middle of that shifting atmosphere, the whispering voices grew into something almost tangible, as if two unseen forces were circling each other right there in the room with me. One voice, the same tender, almost aching tone from before, spoke my name again. "You have to choose," it said. The other, sharp and commanding, cut through it like a blade. "No! They have already chosen." I backed toward the center of the room, my eyes darting between the glass walls and the dark corners. That's when I realized the two voices weren't just echoes. They were coming from the figures outside. Lightning flashed, and for the first time I saw their faces. One was Nathaniel, just as I had seen in the portrait, his eyes alight with an intensity that could almost be mistaken for love, if not for the possessiveness simmering beneath. The other was Elara, pale and beautiful, but no longer the timid figure from the journal. She looked fierce, resolute, almost defiant. They weren't trapped in the past. They were caught between two worlds, and tonight, something had drawn them close enough to break through. The letter in my pocket seemed to burn against my chest, its unfinished words now heavy with meaning. I understood then the one who listens wasn't a stranger in the usual sense. It was me. Somehow, my presence here had blurred the lines between their story and my own. I wasn't just uncovering the truth. I was becoming part of it. The conservatory door burst open with a crash, though no one stood in the doorway. Instead, the wind roared in, carrying with it the scent of the sea and the sound of pounding waves. Nathaniel's voice filled the space, though his lips did not move. "Stay, and I will show you everything," he promised. Elara's voice rose above his, urgent. "Leave now, and you can still be free." The ground trembled harder, cracks spiderwebbing through the old stone floor. The vines writhed along the glass, their roots digging deeper into the walls. Somewhere deep inside the house, a clock began to chime, each toll louder than the last. I realized with a jolt that this was their night, the night of the masquerade, all over again. The choice that had sealed their fate was about to be made once more. Only this time, I was holding it in my hands. The moonlight shifted, spilling over Nathaniel's face as he stepped into the room at last. His figure was solid now, not a flicker or a ghost. He reached out to me, his voice low but compelling. "You feel it too, don't you? That pull. We can end this together." Before I could answer, Elara appeared at his side, though she didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on mine, filled with something that was both longing and warning. "Don't let him bind you," she said softly. "That's how it starts." The tension between them was palpable, the air charged with a century of love and betrayal. My heart pounded as I looked between them, the weight of their history pressing in. Then, without warning, the house gave a violent lurch. The floor split in one corner, sending a rush of cold air up through the cracks. The vines shattered more of the glass, the wind screaming in like a living thing. Outside, the waves slammed against the cliff with a force that made the walls groan. I made my choice not with words, but by stepping forward. I took Elara's hand. Her skin was cold but solid, her eyes wide with both relief and something like sorrow. Nathaniel's expression darkened, the charm draining from his face. "You've made a mistake," he said, his voice no longer soft but edged with something dangerous. The moment our hands touched, the wind howled louder, pulling at us as if trying to lift us off the floor. The cracks in the ground widened, light spilling up from below. Not warm light, but a cold, silver glow that felt like it came from someplace neither alive nor dead. Elara squeezed my hand once, hard. "Run," she whispered. We moved toward the shattered glass, toward the cliff beyond. But just as we reached the edge, I glanced back, and that's when the final twist struck. Nathaniel was gone. In his place stood a man who looked almost exactly like me. The realization hit like ice in my veins. Nathaniel hadn't been trying to keep Elara for himself. He'd been trying to replace himself. The one who listens wasn't just a stranger from her past. It was whoever walked into this house and fit the shape of the man she once loved. And now the house had chosen me. Elara saw it too, and for a moment, fear replaced her resolve. "Don't let it take you," she said, pulling me toward the edge. But the wind was stronger now, and that cold silver light surged upward, wrapping around my ankles like chains. The last thing I remember before the light consumed us was the sound of Nathaniel's voice. My voice, calling out from somewhere deep in the house. And it wasn't pleading this time. It was laughing. The silver light swallowed everything, sky, sea, stone, until it was all I could see. My grip on Elara's hand faltered, her form flickering like a candle fighting against the wind. My body felt weightless, unmoored, as though the house had stripped away every part of me that belonged to the present. And then, as suddenly as it came, the light was gone. I was lying on the conservatory floor. The wind had stilled, the vines hung limp, and the cracks in the stone were gone as if they'd never been there. My lantern was still burning beside me, steady now. For a moment, I wondered if I'd imagined everything, until I saw the letter, still in my pocket, but with one difference. The unfinished words had been completed, in handwriting I didn't recognize. "The truth lives when someone is willing to carry it." I stood, scanning the room. Elara was gone. Nathaniel, both the real and the reflection, was gone too. Only the piano remained, silent and still, though a single white rose now rested on the keys. I touched it gently, the petals cool beneath my fingertips. When I stepped outside, the night was calm. The mist had lifted, revealing the jagged cliffs and the endless ocean beyond. The figures I'd seen on the shore were nowhere in sight. But I knew, in a way that settled deep in my bones, that they weren't truly gone. The Ravencroft family's story wasn't finished. It had simply shifted, finding a place to rest until the next listener arrived. I walked back toward the village at dawn, the first light stretching gold across the horizon. In my mind, I replayed the night's events, the pull of Nathaniel's voice, the urgency in Elara's eyes, the cold certainty in that final laugh. I wondered if I'd done the right thing by taking her hand. I wondered if I had truly freed her or simply traded places in some way I couldn't yet see. When I returned home days later, I placed the letter and the rose inside a small wooden box. Some nights, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear the faint notes of a piano drifting through the air, carrying with them that same mix of longing and warning. Maybe the house will wait decades before it opens its doors again. Or maybe it's already chosen its next guest. What stays with me most is the question I can't answer. Was Elara asking me to save her? Or to stay with her? That, I think, is what will haunt me longest. If you followed the Ravencroft story until now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Did I make the right choice? Or should I have let Nathaniel finish what he started? Drop your theories in the comments. I'm curious to see how you would have decided. And tell me, would you want to see a sequel? Because if the whispers start again, I might have no choice but to return. Summary: The Macabre History of the Ravencroft Family. A Sinister Tale follows a chilling yet romantic journey into a long-abandoned coastal mansion, where whispers of love, betrayal, and a century-old mystery linger. Drawn into the tragic connection between Nathaniel and Elara Ravencroft, the narrator becomes part of their unfinished story, faced with a choice that could free or doom them both. Through atmospheric suspense, forbidden attraction, and the haunting pull of the past, this tale explores the thin line between devotion and possession. The story ends with an unsettling resolution that leaves room for one final, lingering question. B6.